Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are so happy that you're here today. I am Ellen Pleasance Banta, but most people called me Nellie.
And I am Lucinda Pleasance, though most people call me Lucy. We are daughters of Frank Pleasance and Sally McCarty. I was born September 5th, 1856 in New York.
And I was born March 7th, 1866 in Virginia. I reckon you're wondering how we ended up in Wisconsin.
Well, like many people of the time, our family's story was deeply affected by the Civil War. We had been living in our mother's family home in Riverly, Virginia, on the banks of the Potomac River. Father was transferred to the office of the Adjutant General in Richmond. The Civil War was difficult for our family, as it was for much of the South. The destruction from the war was overwhelming. Our family homestead burned after the summer drought, and we needed to start over.
Our grandfather purchased some land in Menasha many years before from Native Americans. He paid $1 an acre. Our family had already lost everything, so we didn't hesitate to head north. Father went ahead in 1877, and then Mother and the 7 children followed soon after. We lived in a grand house on Doty Island over on Namath Street. Now, just a little tidbit of information. Namath is a Native American word that means welcome. I was still school age when we moved here, so I attended Menasha schools. I graduated from Menasha High School in 1884. I was one of 5 graduates that year. It wasn't always easy being a Southerner in a northern school, but I managed.
Well, by the time we moved to Menasha, I was past school age, and I had been taught by my governess in Virginia. My interests were in poetry. I had a poem published by Scribner's Magazine in 1877 and other magazines such as the Atlantic Monthly, the Youth Companion. I was also invited to write a poem for the Menasha Literary Society, a group of young people who believed more attention should be paid to literary matters. That was a cause I could truly support. I wrote a poem that marked the dedication of a new hall space for their meetings on April 25th of 1878.
I remember how you loved to read and write. That's how you learned about the free library movement in Wisconsin, right?
Yes, I gathered a group of Menasha citizens in November of 1895 at the National Hotel. We discussed starting a public library in the community. Elisha Smith spoke in favor of the project and helped with the funding. I was elected president. I was. Of the Menasha Free Public Library Association. And our brother John was also part of the community.
The program was so successful that the first library opened in May of 1896. It wasn't a large space, if I remember correctly. Just a little space, open a couple of days a week.
Well, the library was in a building at the corner of Chute and Main Streets in Menasha. We were only open on Wednesdays and Saturdays for a few hours in the afternoon and another couple of hours in the evening. I agreed to take care of the library and the books. There I found my true calling. I could surround myself with books and share my love of reading with the children of Menasha. I was a librarian for 23 years.
There was nobody better to be the city's first librarian. I may not have been quite as dedicated to libraries as you were, but books play an important part in my life too, although it came in a very different way.
Oh, you're talking about George Banta, right?
Good old George. Heavens to Betsy, can you believe that we were able to have a courtship without Mother finding out?
Well, she was certainly very strict about who was acceptable for her daughters to date. I reckon that was from her upbringing in the South. She would have preferred we did not date any Northerners, which was difficult since we were living in Wisconsin.
And I didn't. George was a fine young man born in Kentucky, even though he was raised in Indiana. Mother still didn't want us dating, and she tried her hardest to shoo him away.
Yes, but Mother didn't plan on her daughters bonding together to help you out. We were sisters after all, and we wanted each other to be happy. For you, that meant being with George. Carrie, Sally, and I covered for you as best we could, and it didn't let Mother know of George's intentions. She was madder than a wet hen when she found out.
Oh, she sure was, but I appreciate it more than you'll ever know. George and I were married in 1886. We moved into a house just down the road from Mother's house on Namath. It was so nice to have family living close by.
Our family home was wonderful. Maybe too good, actually. Caroline, John, Sally, Anna, and I never left. We lived there our entire lives. Only you and our brother Frederick married and moved out. Frederick moved so far away. He lived out yonder in New Jersey. He worked first with the American Cereal Company and then with the Quaker Oats Company. He was a traveling salesman going over to England in 1893 and staying until 1901.
They ate oatmeal in England.
They did.
Traveling salesmen were pretty common in those days. George was a traveling insurance salesman and pretty good at it. But he was fascinated by the printing industry. He had this small printing press that he originally tried to put in my living room. We tried moving it upstairs, but it was much too heavy, so it ended up in my dining room. It was outrageous. He used the press to print off forms he needed for work and made booklets or papers as a little side hobby. But the proper place for a press was certainly not where we eat our meals with our two children. I did convince him that the press would be better suited outside the house, and eventually he put it in a shed.
And that worked well until there was a fire in the shed with the printing press. I remember that cold day in February 1901. The shed was a total disaster afterwards and couldn't be used. But I reckon that fire was a blessing in disguise. He was able to secure some space on Main Street in Menasha for the printing press.
Fortunate indeed. With the printing press on Main Street, people saw it and started asking George if he could help with their printing needs. It helped us start a new business.
The George Banta Printing Company, and then later the George Banta Publishing Company, started in 1901. Having a printing company in the family was helpful for me too. They published a book I wrote in 1916 called Old Virginia Days and Ways. I based it on Mother's reminiscence about her days as a youngster. It was a great way to preserve those memories for our descendants. I do hope that those of you listening will write down your family stories as well.
That was a great project for our family. The publishing business also did work with educational contracts, printing things like yearbooks, national magazines, textbooks, and university catalogs. The early years were certainly a struggle, though.
Oh, yes. The kids were getting to be teenagers, and then George kept traveling as a salesman. Plus, he was dealing with all those health issues. He'd go off for weeks at a time, and you'd be at home. That's when you took over the printing business, right?
You gotta do what you gotta do. Sometime, something had to be done, and so I stepped up. After all, I was running my household successfully, so why not a business? I was fixing to make the company as efficient as possible, so I set out strict rules that were followed with great success. My son George Jr. also had a good head for business and started working with us in 1910. At the age of 17, he even negotiated buying a new building for $1,200.
Well, you had some tricks up your sleeve. I remember the time when you heard that some executives from the Quaker Oats Company were coming, and you wanted to make a good impression in hopes of landing a big booklet contract. You had every press running in the shop, even though they weren't printing one single thing. It was sneaky, but it worked.
Yes, my life wasn't all about business.
Well, bless your heart, it sure wasn't. I always thought it was great that you managed to find time to work on social projects with me.
One of the ones I really liked was the Neenah Emergency Society. It was formed back in 1906 to help the victims of that horrible San Francisco earthquake. Around 3,000 people died April 18, 1906, and over 80% of the city was destroyed. We heard about the devastation in the newspaper, and we wanted to do something. We sewed clothing for the victims. Later on, we turned our attention to local people who needed help. They were a great group of ladies to work with.
And so were the people in the Neenah Menasha Economics Club, later known as the Menasha Homemakers. I was one of the organizing members, and they held their meetings at the Menasha Library. We talked about the library, topics of local interest, and always had great entertainment like soloists and poetry reading.
And we can't forget the Neenah Menasha Visiting Nurses Association. I partnered up with our sister Anne to be one of the founding members of the VNA. We wanted to make sure people in Neenah and Menasha could be seen by a nurse even if they were unable to leave their house. Lucy, you served for many years on the board of directors. The first full-time nurse we hired, Ida Heinke, was so tough that on cold or snowy days, she would walk to her patients to spare the horse.
Well, Ida was a great nurse for the VNA, and she sure had gumption. We were certainly very busy ladies. I also had time to attend meetings from the Women's Tuesday Club in Neenah, the Monday Evening Club in Menasha, and the Yesterday, Today, and Forever Book Reading Club. But eventually, my health forced me to step back from some things.
We were all very sad when you had to quit at the library.
Well, it was very sad for me. I reckon the library work was the most important part of my life, and I loved every minute of it. I remember I wanted to make sure that everyone in Menasha, even the newly arrived German and Polish immigrants, had a chance to read books. So our library carried books in their native languages. We also had space for their children to come and read. I remember many days when young children would be waiting for me on the steps of the library. I always put some new books out on the low shelves just for them. They were so excited. I so very much miss seeing their happy, smiling faces when I had to retire. My poor health quickly caught up with me, and I died on October 28, 1925 in Menasha at the age of 69.
The board dedicated a room at the library in your memory in 1931, when the library finally had enough money to complete a children's room. Our family donated a painting of you to be displayed in the room. The children's area is still dedicated to your memory, and the painting is still there.
Well, I'm so honored that the children have their own space and the library is still flourishing. What happened with the publishing company?
Well, we kept developing new products and ended up being very successful. In the 1920s, we focused on school workbooks and other softcover books. I became the president of the company. Yeah, woman. After George died in 1935. and I stayed on until my death, July 26, 1951. My son George Jr. then took control of the company. It remained a force in Menasha until it was purchased in 2006. Wow, 105 years.
Well, I declare, it's been so nice talking with you this evening, Nellie. And it was wonderful to see all these new friends. I hope you'll find time to read some books, all of you, and visit the library as soon as all of them are open again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Heimerman. I think I just said that. I want to point out one thing. 125 years ago, and a fortnight, John Roberts died. So July 9th, 1895. And it just happens that we're here a fortnight after his death. Greetings, everyone. This is my favorite time of the year, summer. People in Wisconsin know a thing or two about winter, but our summers just can't be beat. It's the perfect time for vacations and taking time to rest and relax. And I know a thing or two about vacations. I'm John Roberts. I was born in 1833 in New York. After the Civil War, I decided to move west. You see, I was a hotel man, and I was looking for the perfect place to set up shop. I first went to Newark, Ohio, and then to Columbus, Wisconsin. I ran hotels in both cities, but I just wasn't satisfied. In November 1870, I moved to Menasha, where I was the first proprietor for the brand spanking new National Hotel, downtown Menasha. I always made sure any hotel that I was running was well kept with fine furnishings, and the National was no exception. Our grand opening was scheduled for November 24th, 1870, which happened to be Thanksgiving. We didn't have the best turnout, but I don't think it was entirely our fault. There was this speaker over there in Neenah at the Pettibone Hall that evening who really drew a crowd. Perhaps you've heard of her. The name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Oh, yeah.
She was one of the key members of women's suffrage movement. But back at the hotel, the National was conveniently located a few blocks from the railroad station in Menasha. Businesses in the area were really starting to boom. The National could accommodate 70 to 100 guests at a time. We also hosted various forms of entertainment, both for travelers and locals. It helped get the word out that our hotel was a great place to stay at. I made sure my hotel also had a postal stop so people could send letters to and from the hotel. And I had an eatery built nearby the railroad station as well. In October 1875, I hosted a party at the National for one of Menasha's best-known citizens. You may have heard of him. Elijah Smith, or E.D. We also called him Elijah. He owned the Menasha Woodenware Company, and he and his wife decided that they'd like to celebrate their 25th anniversary at the National Hotel. We spared no expense for that party. The Smiths wore their wedding attire. It was a great party. I believe Elijah, by the way, is also speaking by his grave tonight. So if you haven't seen him or heard him yet, make sure you visit him when you get by his stone. After the party, I started to think maybe the National wasn't big enough for me either. In 1873, I had circulars drawn up that talked about the fine Menasha scenery and the nearby lake that was ideal for fishing. But the more I promoted the area, the more I realized the location was part of the problem. Sometimes it was hard to get a rowboat from National to a suitable fishing spot in the river, and a lot more effort to get it to Lake Winnebago. There was also some effort needed to get a steamboat. I started to wonder if there was a better location nearby. And of course there was, otherwise the story would end. In 1875, my family and I moved to Neenah. You see, the Doty property, including the Grand Loggery and a lot of land, was available for purchase. One look was all I needed. This was the perfect place for my dream resort. And at the time, it was right for me to go into business on my own. Our new property was right on the edge of Doty Island, on the southern edge, going right out to the lake, with access to the river and Winnebago. You know the Grand Loggery, right? Maybe you've heard it called Doty Cabin.
Yeah.
It was built by James Duane Doty, the second territorial governor of Wisconsin, when he retired. Governor Doty also loved the views and the access to the water. The Grand Loggery was nice, but it was not big enough for my dream. I had to hire an architect, and I chose the best man in the area, William Waters, out of Oshkosh. I wanted a big hotel, like the National. We decided to build a 2-story hotel with verandas facing the river right next to the loggery. It took us 2 years to build it, but by 1877, the Roberts Resort was open for business. We had 35 rooms, all grand and beautiful. We had rowboats, and our guests could catch as many fish as they wanted. Steamboat excursions could come right up to our dock to pick up our guests. We could use the Grand Loggery as a rainy day house where guests could play games or just sit around and relax. Later on, we'd also use the loggery as the kitchen area for our guests. My wife Martha played an important role in our hotel. She was in charge of the food and did a fantastic job. We had animals on the resort, including horses, cows, and chickens. Martha helped to take care of all that, plus our 3 children. Each one of our children were born in a different city. John Jr. was the eldest. He was born while we were in Ohio. George was born in Menasha, and Stella was born in Neenah in 1879, 2 years after we opened the resort. We lived on the property year-round, but the resort was typically open only during the summer season, which for us ran from May to November. I wanted to share with you what a newspaper wrote about our resort. This is quotes. One of the most charming resorts in Wisconsin, a state noted for delightful summer places in which to recreate and rest, is the ever-popular and well-managed Roberts Resort at Neenah. The green lawns, the shady trees, the cool breezes, the pleasant, comfortable hotel, the gentle flowing river, the peaceful scenery of lake and wood, all combined, quiet and soothe the tired nerves of feverish humanity. 1870. In the rush and wild scramble of daily life, much of the beauty of life is missed. Take a day off and visit Roberts Resort. Enjoy the scenery, the black bass fishing. You will be welcomed and will enjoy the day, and it will do you good. Yeah, I wonder who wrote that. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Well, we were also known for our mineral water. The water from our well was described as invigorating, even curative. Some visitors, especially from the south, would ask us to send them water by express. Our resort was also well known for entertainment, especially the parties. Tell me, aside, why can't I find any pictures? On Saturday nights, we would have fancy dress balls. The people of Neenah and Menasha would come to mingle with our guests and the locals dressed up. We would have other dance parties, plays, and orchestra music as well. There was always something fun to do at the resort. All of this entertainment and goodwill attracted a lot of visitors. We even had some famous people call. We entertained President Lincoln's son, Robert.
Oh.
Civil War generals such as Phil Sheridan, Anson Stager, and Martin Beam, too. George Pullman of the railroad car fame, the Pullman cars, he came all the time to our resort. And James Hill, a railroad financier. In 1885, we expanded the resort by building some cottages. This allowed guests to have more personal space while still enjoying all of the amenities of the resort. It was a great addition for us. Also, the Federal Corps of Engineers decided to widen and deepen the river channel between Doty Island and Riverside Park. That allowed larger steamboats and ships to use the river and Lake Winnebago, which meant improved river access for us as well as better fishing. The expansion wasn't entirely good, however. There was a huge elm right across from our resort, and it had become a kind of a landmark for us since we could tell our guests we were right across the way from the elm. Some of them, people called it the council tree. Sadly, it was cut down when the engineers decided to change the path of the river. In 1886, I started to have some health issues. Martha, Stella, and I went to Florida that winter to see if the warmer weather would help me get past my asthma. It worked for a while, but I much preferred to be in Wisconsin. Martha went back to Wisconsin in early March to get the resort ready for the summer. I gave up on Florida and I went to Georgia in April. That was much better, but I couldn't stay away from my resort. And I was in Neenah when it was time to open this for the season. Pardon me. In 1887, I decided to get more involved in the community, and I served as an alderman when C.B. Clark was our mayor. We approved the construction of City Hall in Neenah. The architect was the same one who built the resort, William Waters. He designed a beautiful building for the city, which even included a 110-foot clock tower. The multi-story building had city offices, plus the fire and police departments. We even had 4 jail cells in the building. Everything was going well at the resort, but I can't say the same for my health. I was still struggling. July 9th, 1895 was my last day living on this earth. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I either had a stroke and fell down the steps, or fell down the steps and had a stroke. Not sure it really matters. That fall was the end of my time. My poor Martha was so traumatized, but she was strong too, and managed to run the resort for a few more years with our daughter. Martha sold the property in 1902 to 3 Chicago developers who wanted to remodel the resort into a year-round hotel. Unfortunately, they did not pay their bills, and the property was put back into foreclosure. Martha repurchased the hotel and sold it again. Part was sectioned into new properties, and the hotel was sold to John Strange. It was sad to see it leave the family, but there is still a piece of my heart, a piece of my resort that can be seen today. There were 2 stone pillars that marked the entrance to the hotel that are still standing. You have to see if you can find them on East Forest Avenue. Thank you for visiting me.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. What a wonderful night here in Neenah. Isn't it, Frances?
Yes, Grandfather. It really takes me back. But introductions first. Hello, everyone. I'm Frances Whiting Bassett, daughter of Frank and Bessie Whiting. I was born here in Neenah with my twin sister Frederica on April 24th, 1916. And this is my grandfather, George Whiting.
I'm not originally from this fair city. I was born June 6, 1849, in Gilboa, New York, to Charles and Catherine Whiting. I was the youngest of 8 children. When I was a child, my family moved to Wisconsin and we settled in Ripon.
So how did you end up in Neenah?
Well, I went back east to attend Eastman Business College in New York in 1863. 2 years later, I wanted to be closer to my family, and I returned to Wisconsin. I was hired by the Pettibone and Jones dry goods store in Neenah. I worked really hard in the store and did odd jobs on the side. But after I paid for boarding, I wasn't really making any money. As I was considering my future, I read an interesting book called Treatise on Paper Making. You see, paper mills were just starting up in Neenah, and I got in on the ground floor. I started as a partner in 1872 at the Fox River Paper Mill. I learned all I could about the paper industry and business in general. By 1875, I was named secretary of the Winnebago Paper Mills in Neenah.
You and grandmother got married about that time, right? I think in 1870.
That's right.
Also, I know you eventually went into business on your own. Tell me how you started your paper company.
Well, in 1882, I formed a partnership with William Gilbert to open a paper mill by the government locks on the Fox River down in Menasha. I bought the mill outright from William a few years later. Life was good. Your grandmother and I adopted our son Frank, and we were looking forward to a wonderful future. That was until August 23rd, 1888.
Oh yes, that was the day of the mill accident, right? I grew up hearing that story. At the time, it was known as the worst fatal accident that ever occurred in the history of Menasha. I know you don't really like to talk about it, but could you tell these folks some of the details?
Well, it was awful. The Oshkosh Daily Northwestern described the scene as death's bomb. It started out as a small fire, which wasn't that unusual in a paper factory. Typically, someone on staff would put it out, or the fire department would come take care of it. Well, when this fire started that night, a crowd of people gathered to watch it. We didn't know that a nearby rotary bleaching drum was filling with steam from the fire. There was no way for the steam to escape, so the drum exploded. It shot out of the factory, went through a neighboring office building, and eventually landed on the train track. The drum was so large and so heavy, it just took out everything in its path. Unfortunately, 14 people lost their lives that night, and many others were badly injured. I went to survey the damage, but the scene was just so gruesome, I had to turn away.
I can't even imagine the horror of it all. From the stories I've heard, the Neenah and Menasha communities really came together to help the victims and their families.
That is true. The spirit and goodwill shown by everyone in the community was inspiring.
And you decided to rebuild the mill on the same spot, modernizing it and making it better.
Well, we were known for making specialty papers. We started out with writing papers and branched out from there.
You made strong paper those used for art, greeting cards, and my favorite, wedding and party invitations.
Yeah, you sound just like your father. He loved having parties. Maybe we should tell the people about the boathouse.
That was the best place to have parties. My dad, Frank, bought the property in 1929 when I was a teenager. My older brother and sister and my twin sister and I had so much fun there. My dad loved boating and yachting and parties.
I'm sure you inherited your love for parties from your father. Didn't he throw some infamous get-togethers at the boathouse too?
He did. When the Doty Tennis Club hosted tournaments in Neenah, he invited some of the tennis greats over. Pancho Gonzalez and Bobby Riggs. Sometimes he had come-as-you-are parties, where he would just call up some of his friends and invite them over to the party immediately. A few times, people came over in their pajamas. It was a hoot.
Speaking of the Doty Tennis Club, you were quite a tennis player, weren't you?
Yes, I played in singles and doubles division at the club in 1939. It was pretty fun to compete with world-class tennis right in my own backyard. I ranked in singles and in doubles. My partner Jeanette Bilo and I were runners-up.
You were a fantastic athlete. You also did horse jumping events as well, right?
Yes, sir. I loved riding horses. I was able to compete all over the United States, and Dad took all of his daughters on a trip to Hawaii and California in 1938. I learned how to hula dance. On one trip, I also got to play with Spencer Tracy and Buddy Rogers. Frederica and I owned horses and played locally as well. We had so much fun.
Well, I'm glad you girls had such a good time. Your father loved his family so much. He also had a love of planes.
You did too. I remember hearing about the aviation exhibit you attended with Dad back in September 1911. The one where the world-famous aviator Cal Rogers came to Appleton.
Well, now let's be honest. Cal was your dad's brother, so we knew him before the exhibition.
Of course, I'm just proud to have him in the family. But that exhibition also included a flying demonstration, right?
Well, yes, and your dad decided he wanted to be a passenger in that plane. I was against that idea. I didn't want Frank to be hurt, but eventually I gave in. They stayed in the city, flying from the ballpark to the driving range. Well, on the way back, Frank Wendigale joked that he could drive back to the ballpark faster than the airplane could fly. Frank never could back away from the challenge. So he rode in the plane with Cal and raced the car back to the ballpark. The car won.
That sounds like my dad. So did you get up in the plane?
Well, your dad talked me into it. He said it was an easy ride, very smooth, much better than an automobile. So I took a 10-minute ride. Frank even convinced your mother to get in the airplane for a ride. We were some of the first people in the area to experience a plane ride.
Of course, our family has a long history with aviation. I believe there was once a Whiting Airport, right, Grandfather?
Yes, though not many people remember it now. A few years after the exhibition, an airport was developed outside of Appleton, off of Appleton Road and Highway 41. It was named after me because of all the philanthropic work I had done in the Fox Valley. The airport was used by North American Airways. Unfortunately, the airlines had to stop flying the mail stop route because of government regulations regarding mail stops in airports. Basically, my airport was too close to the one in Oshkosh, and it went bankrupt in 1930.
Well, the airport may be gone, but Whiting Memorial Church still stands.
Well, that's right. And it's all because of my dear, sweet first wife, Edna. She was the daughter of Oliver Babcock. The Babcock family originally came to Neenah from Fayetteville, New York in the mid-1860s and started a Baptist ministry here. He married Edna and I in the church on June 29, 1870. He left in 1873 to pursue ministries in Appleton and Omri, and then returned to Neenah shortly before his death in 1885. Edna worked relentlessly to make the Baptist congregation strong. Unfortunately, Edna died way too young in July of 1909. I had the mausoleum built here after her death. And to honor her memory and strong commitment to the Baptist faith, I donated money and some land off of Commercial and High Streets in Neenah in 1916 for a new church to be built. June 3rd, 1917, the church was dedicated as the Memorial Baptist Church in memory of Edna and my mother, Catherine Whiting.
The church was very special to me as well. I was married in the Whiting Memorial Baptist Church in 1942. It was bittersweet because my mother had passed away. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I had the honor of wearing my mother's wedding dress. We had a reception at North Shore Country Club. Dad had remarried to Merle Stevens. Merle was a special lady. She sang on Broadway. They were happy, and so was I. I had met the man of my dreams, Robert Bassett, who was a lawyer in Green Bay and prominent in the legal world and Republican political circles in the 1940s.
Well, speaking of politics, I was a big roller in my day, you know. I was mayor of Neenah in 1884 and 1885. I was also a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 1904. I was proud of what I could do in local politics, but my main focus was always on my businesses to ensure they ran smoothly both here in Neenah, Menasha and at our Whiting Clover Mill.
You were also very generous. You gave money to Brooklyn College, Lawrence University, and Theta Clock Memorial Hospital.
Well, a lot of that came from my estate. I wanted to make sure I helped the community even after my death. Your dad inherited most of the estate, but he also assumed responsibilities of running the businesses.
It was a great responsibility. As much as he wanted to live a good life and have fun, I think he also wanted to make sure the company continued to great legacy. He also wanted to do something for the city of Neenah. In 1950, he gave 20% of the boathouse to the city. Unfortunately, Dad died very unexpectedly during a trip with home in 1952 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After his death, Neenah was given the boathouse. It was named in his honor. In fact, you can still visit our boathouse and have your own parties there.
Wouldn't it be great to have one last party on old Doty Island? I so loved growing up there and living there. I lived a long and happy life, and I died July 17, 1930, at the ripe old age of 81. Hundreds of people came to my funeral, despite the oppressive heat that day.
Sadly, I didn't live a long life. I just was 28 when I got sick in 1944 and didn't see to live another birthday. January 31st, 1945 in Maryland. My husband was serving in the military at that time, which is why I was there. At a small private ceremony, I was laid to rest with the rest of my family.
But the family line prospered, so I hear.
Yes, my brother George was the one who carried on the family name and tradition of running the company. It was in our family for 5 generations through 2014. The mill closed for good in 2016 because of the changing technology. At the time, it was one of the smallest and oldest paper mills still in operation. Dad's house is on the National Register of Historic Places, as is the boathouse.
Well, Frances, it's been nice visiting with you this evening and reminiscing about all the fun we had on Doty Island. We hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you for visiting, and remember, the Whiting Boathouse on Doty Island is still there and available to the public. You can contact the City of Neenah Park and Recreation Department for details. Have a great evening.
Again, I'm Edie Smith. I'm right here, and I was born in Brattleboro, Vermont. And a friend of mine, Dr. Bowman is his name, invited me to come out west. So I came out west here to Doty Island and fell in love with it right away. Early in my life, I fell in love with Doty Island and Menasha. But I had to go back east. So I went back east, back to actually Rhode Island, was where I lived most of my life in my earlier years, even though I was born in Vermont. But I lived in Rhode Island, and I found the love of my life, Julia, and she lived in Rhode Island, and her father, Spencer was his name, Maury, was a banker, and he wanted me to work in the bank with him. I thought that was boring. Okay, totally boring, not for me. I'm an adventurous. So I said, no, I don't want to work in the bank. So I married the love of my life, Julia, and on the very next day, we left for Menasha. Now, this was in 1850. We got married in October of 1850 and worked our way to Menasha, taking every mode of modern transportation of the day. That would be, of course, train, steamboat, and carriage. All the way across the Great Lakes to get here to Doty Island. I loved it. Beautiful area. Well, when I got here to Doty Island, my friend, Dr. Dolan, and I, we got into a dry good business together. Okay, we're working in a dry goods store. We struggled like a lot of businesses at the time, but eventually it started taking off. Well, then, I noticed that in the dry goods store, a lot of products were sold in these wooden buckets. Barrels, tubs, all kinds of things were made from these wooden products. I was inquisitive. I'm adventurous. My wife is adventurous. I approached the guys who were making these pails, and they wanted to sell. So after 3 years of being here in Menasha, I bought the pail factory. And with the pail factory, I also worked in the dry goods store. Now, what I didn't know, the pail business is hard work. It's really hard work, and I did it mostly myself. Worked in the factory, I milled the wood, dried it out, made the pails, made the buckets. When I got a whole cartload, I would go throughout Neenah, Menasha, selling these pails, these buckets, these barrels, these tubs. Again, in the mid part of the 1800s, a lot of things are made out of wood that maybe you don't realize. Bathtubs were made out of wood. big butter churns were made out of wood. And of course, the number one product, Amazon shipped in wood barrels, okay? Wood buckets, pails, all that kind of good stuff. So once I got enough of them made, I would sell them to the farmers or to the millers. Now, as all of you know, here in Neenah, Menasha, Wisconsin in the 1850s, wheat was king. Wheat was what made Neenah, Menasha the Twin Cities. In fact, a little side note for you. Predictors in 1870 believed Neenah, Menasha would be the Twin Cities. What we think of today as the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, that's what predictors were saying Neenah, Menasha would be, that size out there. Unfortunately, there's a whole wheat thing that changed, and we're not getting into that. It's a whole different story. Come back next year for that one. Back to the buckets. So we're making these pails, and I'm selling them. And I started selling them, all over Neenah, Menasha, and then throughout Wisconsin. And then my hot market, Chicagoland. So we'd sell them as far as Chicago. And then we started in Illinois. So we sold all kinds of these buckets. But what really slowed the whole process down was there was no train that came to Menasha. There was no train that came to Neenah. And then in 1862, I finally convinced the Chicago Northwestern line to come. And what it cost us, Neenah, Menasha, and businessmen, was we told them we would pay to build the bridges and level the track if they brought their line in. And eventually they did. They brought their line in. Now we could import and export products a lot faster. That was in 1862. 1862, the market for pails, barrels, and buckets soared. Anyone want to guess why?
Civil War.
Somebody, loud. I can't hear you. There's highway traffic.
Civil War.
Civil War! Yes, the Civil War is going on. And guess who needed buckets? Who needed wheat? Who needed meat? Who needed nails? Who needed bullets? And what are we going to ship that in? Buckets, pails, barrels, all made in Menasha. So we're talking the Union Army. The Union Army bought this stuff, and business was doing really, really well. In fact, by that time, we were close to the largest employer in Menasha. We had 250 people employed in Menasha of the city of 2,500. So in other words, about 10% of the people in Menasha worked at the pail factory. Now, if you know anything about pail making, which I'm sure all of you do, because you've probably seen them, they're made in these long wooden strips. And you have to cut these long wooden strips out, and then you let them dry. And then when you have these huge drying houses that you just leave them in and let them dry in there. And then you would take them and you would steam them over an open fire to bend them. Wood, dried, open fire. Maybe we had a few fires. Okay, we had a lot of fires. But there was one in particular that happened in April of 1871. And, 1870. And it burned 11 of our dry houses here in Menasha. And if it wasn't for the Neenah and Menasha fire departments that came rushing in, specifically, the Neenah Fire Department had a steam pumper that could pump more and more water that actually saved our entire business. And we're very, very grateful for them for doing that. Well, we would rebuild after this, and business was kind of up and down at times. And then in 1871, another fire happened. But it wasn't in Menasha. It was in Chicago. It was the Chicago fire that happened. And a lot of you know about 300 people were killed, thousands of people were left homeless, and one of our warehouses had all of our inventory of pails and barrels burned up in it. And it hit us pretty hard financially. So in the 1870s was a bit of a challenging time for us. Also in the 1870s, there's a depression that breaks out in the country as a whole. And normally that's the case after a war happens. Sometimes there's a depression in the economy. 1872, there's a depression in the economy. And my company had $250,000 in debt. I had to go into receivership. Well, I love my company. I love the workers. It was like family to us. So what I decided to do was go to my stepfather, or my father-in-law. Went to the father-in-law back in Rhode Island, Spencer Maury. I said I needed to borrow some money. He said, well, I'll tell you what. I will buy your business. I will have 90% of the shares in your business. I want my daughter and my children, or my grandchildren, to be financially sound. In fact, I'll give my daughter 2% of the business. You get none. We'll give you a job. Well, I decided to do that. He made the president of this new company, which he called the Menasha Woodenware Company, because I called it the Pail Factory. He called it the Menasha Woodenware Company. He gave it a new president, a baker in town by the name of Henry Hewitt. Henry Hewitt. That name sound familiar to anybody? Anyone live on the island? Is there a Hewitt Street on the island? Interesting. Well, Henry Hewitt was the president. I was the superintendent. And it took me about a decade or so, but I made enough money to buy the company back and own it again. And what did it, of all things? Candy, I tell you. Candy is the way to go. How is candy related to pails? Well, they sold it in pails, in buckets. And we had a unique invention that we would sell with our candy pails. That is a lid that locked to prevent theft. Our pails were so beautiful that the store owners would display the candy in our pails with our name on it. And with this locking device, the company took off. It took off again. And that's what perpetuated me to go back into the presidency. Well, let me introduce you to my family. I told you I have a lovely wife by the name of Julia. I have 5 children. We had 2 daughters who passed away in childhood. We have Carrie here and Mary. Carrie and Mary are my 2 children that never made it into adulthood. My oldest son, Charles, or CR, he's buried right over there in that large vault at CR, and his family is over there. I have another son, Henry, and he took the business out west. Timber is a big thing in this industry, so he ventures out west, and he passes away in Pasadena, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure where he's buried. My daughter, Jane, is buried right behind me here, and she married a casket. So this is her right here. This is my daughter. And I am buried right here with my lovely wife, Julia. So that is my family. Now, my son, Charles, or CR as we like to call him, he had that adventurous spirit like my wife and I. So he didn't want anything to do with the business. You know how children are. You want them in the business, they don't want anything to do with the business. He struck out on his own and he started a broom handle business. But we eventually will buy out the broom handle business and make him an executive in the business. And eventually he will take over the business later on in his life. Well, I knew that the city of Menasha needs education. I'm a big proponent of education. And I wanted a university in Menasha. So I'm going to buy up a whole bunch of land on the island, about 25 acres of land in the island. And the university I was looking at was called Downer College. And I was trying to woo them to come to Menasha, and they decided they didn't want it. So now I have 25 acres of land in the middle of Doty Island, and I decided, let's give it to the city. Let's give it to the city so the city can use it and make their first park. So kids can swim, so we can go walk in the flowers, we can take pictures at prom and homecoming there, maybe even walk a little island of valor, maybe even dance in the dance hall during a future world war. Maybe you've heard of Smith Park in Menasha? They were so glad about the donation of the land, they had a huge parade. They got the fire trucks out, they rang church bells, they came to my house and gave speeches, we had fireworks that went off. They were so happy to have that to be their first park. Well, if this is your first time here, and I'm the first person that you listen to, you're going to go over to there and you'll hear two women. Lucy Pleasance is one of the ladies. Lucy over there invited me to a meeting at the National Hotel in Menasha in 1895. And at that, she is proposing a free library for Menasha. Now, libraries back in the day, as you all probably know, in the 1890s, they were like rooms in like City Hall or in a fire department or something like that. They weren't like standalone buildings. Well, that's what Lucy wanted, was a free library for people to come and get books. So I said, okay, I'll donate money, but here's the clause. The clause is we want the community involvement. We want community to invest in it. And the community did so well in investing in it that we ended up not just having a free library room, but I donated land to build a building on it. And again, the city was so happy that they ended up naming the library after me. Smith Library. So when you came over the bridge, the Mill Street Bridge, to downtown Menasha, you can see the library. Well, those were two of my ventures out there in philanthropy, but there was also many more. But unfortunately, I got sick with cancer, as I think a guy by the name of Forrest Gump said once. The cancer. And at the age of 72, on July 7th of 1899, I passed away. And my son Charles, or CR, took over the business. Now, he, being the adventurer's one, he starts making this business climb and being very successful. He decides to figure out a way to transport products so people would know it. He got oversized circus cars to ship our barrels in. And then he painted them bright colors with Menasha woodenware on them. So as people were sitting, waiting as the train goes by, which unfortunately we don't do much anymore, thank goodness for the bridges, they go over now, but people would read it. And they saw our sign, and the business took off because of that. Very successful. In fact, CR needed more timber, so he starts looking in the northwestern part of the state of Wisconsin. And he ends up building what's called a stave mill. A stave mill is where you make the strips of lumber for the pails. And he named the little town after his wife, in honor of his wife. The lady that she is, Smith, you see, Lady Smith, was named after Charles or CR's wife. Now, he goes all the way west to Oregon and Washington, and they find what's called the Sitka, Spruce Sitka tree. And what the Spruce Sitka does is that they made it into butter tubs like this one here. And butter could stay in it for a year. Prior to that, they were using ash, and ash got moldy in 6 months. Butter in this tub could last a year. So the business takes off and soars. We transitioned into corrugated boxes in the 1920s and made kids furnitures and all kinds of different products. Now I'm running long because I'm long-winded. Sorry about that. But to end my story, it's now called the Menasha Corporation, is what the Menasha Woodenware is. And we are now in corrugated boxes and plastics. But we started out with pails and buckets. And we transformed and we changed and we shifted, and it's still family owned. It's one of the largest family owned businesses in the United States. And at the time it was in the 1880s and 90s at the height, it was the largest pail factory in the United States. So welcome and thank you for coming to the cemetery walk. And if you have any other questions, we'll hang out for a while.